So update 1.1.1.5 went live the other day. I do wish that they would shorten the update naming just because it's already getting kind of wild and we're only in season 1. But this update came with some pretty solid fixes in regards to the bloom or the bullet dispersion. And so today we're once again going to be going over the biggest winners and losers of this update. Now in these videos I would normally do 5 winners and 5 losers, but honestly there are way more winners in this update, mostly because they've obviously done a fix to the bloom and therefore more guns are benefiting from that. And so I'm actually going to split this into 7 winners and 3 losers just because there really aren't 5 losers in my opinion. Now, once again, these changes are mostly surrounding the actual bloom issue. From what I can tell, there are no damage or time to kill changes in this update. So yeah, just like the last video, this is all pretty much to do with just the accuracy in the bloom when combined with coming out of a sprint or strafing. To come to these conclusions, I'm pretty much just comparing the weapons that were most affected by that bloom bug based on data in the previous update with how they act now that the bug seems to be mostly fixed, albeit there is actually apparently another fix for this coming in the next update, which I'd imagine will drop with the new content that is coming this Tuesday. But that is a very long-winded intro. Let's not waste any more time and let's get stuck into the 5 biggest winners and losers of update 1.1.1.5. Now, first and foremost, we have got something that I absolutely love to see here in the list. This is the L85A3, and this one is pretty ironic because this was actually on the losers list in the previous video. This was heavily affected by the previous round of bloom changes that they made, but obviously in that update, they hadn't actually fixed the issue itself. And so now that that seems to be mostly fixed, the L85 is once again back to being a very solid choice. And I love this because it is one of my favorite, if not potentially my favorite weapon in the game, and I'm very glad to have my baby back. So if you guys enjoy the L85A3, well, you can rejoice in knowing that it is finally a very viable weapon again. Moving on, we have got the M60, which is similar to the L85A3, had some pretty big ups and downs where it started really good at launch and then that last update kind of messed it up a little bit. But this thing absolutely slaps right now, again, just like it did at launch. It is honestly pretty beamy for an M60. It's not beamy compared to a lot of other weapons in the game, but compared to how I would expect an M60 to be, it's pretty accurate. And so if you like LMGs, give the M60 a try. It is very solid now, and this thing obviously very much packs a punch as well. Now moving on, we've got the B36A4, which once again was in the losers list last time, and this was one of the most heavily affected by that bloom bug. In fact, in the video that I did testing what was actually going wrong initially, this was the weapon that I used to test it just to kind of show how bad it was, because I knew that the B36 was kind of busted. So it is good to see that it is finally back as a very viable weapon. It's still maybe not quite as good as it felt in the beta and stuff, because honestly in the beta it felt like it was potentially the best weapon in the game. But yeah, this update has really fixed the B36, so if you enjoy using this weapon, give it a try, see how it feels, because it definitely feels a lot better than it did just last week. Now moving on, we've got the AK4D, which is an absolute beast. Now I hadn't really used this gun all that much, to be honest, prior to the update, but when I was doing all this testing, this thing feels very good. Now it was already really good, but obviously the bloom was affecting the overall accuracy, whereas now this thing feels like super accurate. It obviously does have a little bit of kick to it, but it also deals very good damage. And so if you guys like those type of weapons, kind of similar to the L85A3 but just with a slightly slower rate of fire, give the AK4D a try after this update, because it feels honestly like it could potentially be a top 5 weapon in the game at the moment. Next up, we have then got the Cord, which is now back to arguably being the best weapon in the game. This one was very heavily affected by the bloom issues. It was like super noticeable, especially because it has a fast rate of fire, and I think in turn that makes people, including me, use it a little bit more like an SMG than an AR or a carbine. But it is definitely back to being up there as one of the better weapons in the game. It feels like as you come out of a sprint now, this thing is going to laser onto people a lot quicker than it was when that bloom issue was actually taking place. So if you enjoyed using the Cord in the past, you can be happy knowing that, again, this is probably the best weapon in the game, or at least up there. It's probably the most versatile is how I would explain it. May not be the best in any given situation, but it's got some pretty good range, it's pretty accurate, and it is also very good up close. Moving on, we've got another one of my personal favorites, and I think kind of a fan favorite really, in the SCAR, or the SOR 556. And this one is very much back to how it felt prior to that bug actually sort of making its way into the game. I can't remember if it was right around the time of launch or if this was actually back in the beta, but there was a point when the Scar felt like it was potentially one of the best weapons in the game, and then that bloom bug really kind of screwed that over. So it took a bit of a hit for sure, but it is now back to feeling really, really good. Especially for those of you who are playing RedSec, I think the Scar is now going to be really, really good in RedSec as well, because it is kind of perfectly suited for those lines of sight where they're a little bit longer. You're fighting it more mid to long range, which happens quite a lot in RedSec. And so just like the rest, give the Scar a try. I'm sure you guys are going to enjoy it because it is definitely noticeably better than it was in the last update. Now, lastly, for the winners, we've got an SMG here, which is kind of rare to see, but this one, for some reason, seemed like it was pretty heavily affected by the bloom issue, even though most of the SMGs actually weren't. As far as I could tell from all of the previous data, this was one of the SMGs with the most dispersion when coming out of a sprint or when strafing, and that seems to be a lot better now, so it is good to have an SMG in here. To be fair, the PW7, the MP7 doesn't really get named in amongst a lot of the, you know, the better SMGs in the game. There's the PW5A3, there is the SGX, the SL9. There's a lot of really, really good SMGs, and I don't see the MP7 actually getting mentioned that much, but it does feel a lot more viable now. So hopefully that helps balance out the SMG class just a little bit, and I'll definitely be using this bad boy quite a bit more because I do very much love the MP7, as I'm sure most of you guys do as well. Now, before we get on to the biggest losers as well, if you guys are new to the channel and you're interested in more content just like this, I'll be doing this exact video for pretty much every single update, but there is a lot more guide content and stuff on the way too. So if you are new, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on all of that upcoming content. Now, for the first loser in the list, we've actually got the KTS, which is on this list for multiple reasons. Now, first and foremost, all of the weapons on this losers list are mostly the more accurate weapons that have now kind of inadvertently been nerfed simply because the other weapons got better realistically. But not only is that the case with the KTS, it actually does feel slightly less accurate to me personally. Now, I don't actually have the data to back that up because I wasn't testing this in the previous update. So this one is just purely based on feel in terms of it feeling less accurate. I can't actually prove that. It just feels less accurate to me. I don't know why that is. I know that they did do a general balance pass to the overall bloom on top of, you know, fixing the issue itself. So maybe that's why. Maybe I should dig a little bit deeper into the actual dispersion, but I don't know. I've been using the KTS a lot, especially in RedSec, and it feels very, very accurate. Whereas now post-update, it's still obviously very accurate, but it just feels less accurate than it was. Maybe that's because the rest are just more accurate, so the gap between them is smaller. I'm not really sure, honestly, but having used this quite a bit over the last few days, it honestly does feel less accurate than it did prior to this update. Now, next on the list, we have got the AK205, and this one, I'll be honest, is just purely here because the others got more accurate. It is literally as simple as that. This weapon hasn't been nerfed as far as I can tell, so realistically it hasn't actually changed, which is kind of crazy to put it on the biggest losers list when it literally hasn't changed. But the reason I've got it here is because this is arguably the most accurate weapon in the game, and the downside to it is it doesn't have very good damage output. But with that bloom bug being an issue over the last few weeks, this was a little bit more viable because yes, the damage is low, but with it being so accurate, you were able to kind of get a few more shots off compared to your enemies if they were using weapons that were affected by the bloom. That isn't really the case anymore. You're going to just lose more gunfights now because the other weapons, the L85A3, the B36, those sort of weapons are objectively higher damage dealers than the AK205, and they are also now more accurate than they were, which is the strength of the AK205. So for me, this one has inadvertently been nerfed. Nothing was actually changed about the AK205 from what I can tell, but to me it now kind of feels like it doesn't really have any strengths because its strength is being accurate and all of the other weapons just got way more accurate. So to me, that in itself is kind of a nerf. Now, last on the list, we have got another very similar weapon in the SL9. I don't mean similar in terms of being similar to the AK205. I mean, the reasons this is a loser is for similar reasons. This is a very, very accurate SMG, and don't get me wrong, it's still very viable. I should make that clear. This is still a very, very good weapon, but similar to the AK205, with this being so accurate prior to this update, when all the other ones were kind of suffering, it just felt even better because you were just hitting shots that you weren't hitting with other weapons. Whereas now, with even, like I said, the PW7, you're going to be more accurate with those other weapons, which inadvertently nerfs the SL9 as well. So unfortunately, that is a bit of a loss for the SL9. Like I said, it's still very viable. Don't count this as me saying, oh, this got a huge nerf and it sucks now. It is still a very, very good SMG, and it's very satisfying to use still. But yeah, when all the other weapons got a big improvement to their accuracy, that does unfortunately nerf the SL9 in kind of the same way that I mentioned for the KTS and the AK205. But that is it for the biggest winners and losers of update 1.1.1.5. Now, like I said, there were, as far as I can tell anyway, no changes to actual damage stats or the time to kill or anything like that. And so in the future, these will hopefully be a little bit more diverse in terms of, like, there'll be some genuine big changes and weapons that get huge buffs and huge nerfs. These are pretty small changes at the end of the day. It's really just down to the accuracy. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to be doing this for every update moving forward. And so if you do enjoy this type of content, keeping on top of which weapons are improving or getting worse, then be sure to hit that subscribe button, because there is plenty more content on the way just like this. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and we'll see you all out there on the battlefield.